Well, thank you for joining us. My name is Reed Tyler. I'm the Director of Business Intelligence for BWF. I head up all things BI at BWF and help nonprofits use their data better. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Kaitlin.
Hi, everyone. As Reed said, my name is Kaitlin. I also work in business intelligence at BWF. My background is in data analysis, reporting, and data visualization for prospect development and campaign analytics, mostly in higher education fundraising. And I'm excited to be here with you all today.
Great. Just a few housekeeping items. As we had mentioned, the chat is disabled. Please use the Q&A for any questions. We're going to hold all questions and answers for the end of our presentations. So with that, we will get started. So what we're talking about today, first I want to kind of set the expectation of what is business intelligence. And I want to use a traditional definition for that, which is the idea of leveraging data for competitive advantage. So using your data to make better decisions or make quicker decisions. But it's not just the visualization piece that we're talking about, but we're talking about the whole landscape of what BI really is. And we think that is often missed from a holistic perspective of when we're implementing business intelligence. Especially at smaller organizations that don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the expertise or the technology to really come at this from the same way that a larger organization might. And so we want to make sure that we level set there and can understand that concept. So what we see a lot is still a lot of manual processes. And what I'm trying to highlight in this slide is that we're putting these things together, we're aggregating data or transforming data still from a manual perspective. And a lot of what we're doing is talking about that process of the data and not necessarily what the data is and what we are, not really what the actionable side of the data that we're presenting or sharing or et cetera. So instead, what we want to do is bring these up in meetings, and the data should prompt conversation. It should be a useful reference rather than something that we're just talking about the data. We want to use the visualizations in our dashboards and such to be actionable. So ultimately what we mean is we want more busy minds and not busy hands. So we don't want people having to conduct all these manual processes. We hire people for their intelligence, not necessarily for their hands-on keyboard work. We want to utilize their intelligence in that manner. I have a quick relevant, I know I said I'm not going to answer any questions until the end, but I have a relevant question that I might pop in and just interject. So how would you differentiate BI from analytics and data science? I mean, I think that BI is the umbrella over all of it. So I think that data science they can be described as different, but BI is a very generalized term. And I think Microsoft, having the product of Power BI, Power Business Intelligence, has really kind of started the defining aspect is just visualization. I don't see it like that. I think it's the overall encompassing utilization of data to make better decisions. So again, talking about clearing the way for actionable data, it's really important to think about those conversations of when you have a dashboard up or you're presenting something for the first time. We want to steer the conversation away from, well, how is that calculated? I'm sure everybody here has presented a dashboard or something, and the first question is that number correct? Or is that graph right? It looks a little bit different. So we don't want that to happen. We have to level set to say, we're going to use this dashboard to make decisions and make our jobs easier and to make better decisions. I'll toss it over to Kaitlin.
Yeah, so I can think of a very clear example of that too, Reed. At a previous job, I do have experience with that process of end user adoption and overcoming skepticism about the data and how it's being used. I can remember an hour-long meeting presenting dashboards where I spent maybe 45 or 50 minutes of the meeting answering questions about the data. Where was it pulled? What was excluded? What kind of calculations were used on it, et cetera. And it left very little time to actually talk about as you said, the actionable part of the data. And I think, some of this, especially at the beginning, is normal and is good. Answering questions and being transparent is part of trust building. But if that's happening over and over, it could be signaling a problem. The goal, as you mentioned, is to shift the conversation away from the data itself and to the actions, the insights, that strategy you can get from the data when your data is clean, when it's well visualized and accessible to your users. So that's just one example of an obstacle you can run into during BI implementation, but there are several others we want to cover today so that you are prepared for this shift. So with that in mind, we'd like to do a poll of everyone and get your take on what the biggest obstacle for implementing BI is at your organization. We have, our choices are A, executive sponsorship, B, data governance or cleanliness, C, lack of technical expertise, D, budget, or E, user adoption. And we're going to launch that poll here soon. Okay, I think we'll just give everyone a few more seconds to get their answers in, and then we'll share the results with everyone.
So I'm seeing a big mix of all kinds of answers. It looks like we had a issue with the actual poll. So thank you for providing that in the chat. For our next poll, we'll make sure to get that working. But it is interesting to see that all of these items are concerns for organization. And that's really what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so the fact is that, yeah, all of these can be major hurdles for an organization, but we've tried to consolidate them down into three main buckets on our BI checklist. So we have executive sponsorship, data governance, and what we're calling the right tools, which is, whatever BI platform you choose that you can say is intuitive, user-friendly, and actionable. So we're going to try to cover each of these areas today, and I'm going to have Reed kick us off with the first one, executive sponsorship.
So what perspective do you need to have for you to sell this to your boss, and why do you think it's important? Those are the kind of questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're advocating for sophisticated softwares or investment in resources, whether it be staffing or just money for various softwares and such, to utilize our data a little bit better. So the first and most obvious to me is that automation process. That automation process really saves a lot of staff time in manually creating reports or manipulating data or whatnot. And we did a study a while back that said that 45% of organizations are reporting that they spend more than 16 hours every month on gathering data, manipulating data, presenting data. And that's every single month they recreate that process. And only 9% said that that process is completely automated. And we have, a sophisticated BI environment where the process of loading the data and transforming it and turning it into visualizations is all automated, that whole pipeline. And this might look familiar to anybody that's ever had a job, but using Excel for manual manipulation creates a lot of different errors. And there's just aspects of this that can create distrust in the data. whether it be, staff attrition. How do I learn this process? How do I recreate it? And instead, we want a one source of truth interactive dashboard that gives leaders the ability to pop in, look at the same thing every month, see the data being updated in real time. And this is created once, or there's maintenance and such, but created once, and we don't have to recreate the wheel every single month. And so I think of it kind of like a relationship to a reference book or a dictionary or such. And I found an interesting tidbit that Merriam-Webster, they only release new editions every 10 to 12 years. And then annually, they have a process to do minor edits. And that's kind of the mind frame I think we should think about data as well. Yes, data is changing all the time, but the transformation process of building data sets and producing data visualizations and such, that doesn't need to happen and be recreated every month. We should have a system that is similar to a reference book. That way, user adoption for executives is much easier because they trust it and they use it. And so ultimately what this means is that BI, this idea of data, should be at the center of our organizations. And what this does is, as visions are created, we create strategy and tactics to implement the vision, then implement the strategy. We can use BI to communicate that strategy and send that to the team via metrics or goals or what have you, and progress to that. The team is then doing the actionable stuff, and we are measuring that, going back into the BI tool, which is at the end of the day, giving executives the ability to measure whether or not their strategies are successful, are effective in implementing the vision.
Okay, so now we have our first check on our checklist for executive sponsorship. Hopefully you have some tips here now to help you get that executive sponsorship. And we're assuming that, now you've got that buy-in from your executives, they're ready to go and they're excited. But what's next? What's the next practical thing that you have to consider? And for us, that is really data governance. It can be a common misconception that tools and technology are going to fix our data problems. This chart by Anmit, which is a data asset management firm in the UK, polled 100 different chief data officers from organizations around the world and asked them questions about data versus technology. And what they found was that most of these chief data officers, said that technology, 88% said that technology gets the most budget, 73% said it gets the most attention. But if you look at the bottom two bars, they also think that the data itself is the most critical for business transformation. And also 80% said that they thought it faced the most challenges. From an executive level, it's often thought that all you need to do is to take your database in whatever shape it is right now, feed that into a BI platform of some kind, and voila, you get beautiful data visualizations and dashboards that you can use right away. The truth is that the best BI platforms out there can't fix bad data. So you really need to adopt a data first mindset and make sure that your data systems are clean, that they're secure, well managed, and well understood before you start feeding that data into a BI tool. Instead, you need to start with data governance, ensuring the integrity, the security, and usability of your data, having appropriate documentation, having a user adoption and compliance to your business rules. That's where you need to start to get your database in the shape it needs to be in before you start plugging that into your BI tool of choice. And obviously, this is not a job for one person. This takes several layers of an organization to do before you get ready for that actual dashboard development. But wait, there's more before you do that dashboard development. Once you have the governance in place, and once you have your BI platform, you're getting connected, you still have a lot of work to do before you can start building your visualizations. About 80% of the work is actually developing the data set. You have to understand the database. You have to have a working knowledge of the tables and relationships. You have to create views or models, and then test and optimize the data. And only then are you actually ready for the last 20% of the work, which is developing the metrics you want to use and then creating those dashboards.
And I might interject and just say that the point of this conversation is not necessarily that we don't understand this, but executives don't always understand this. And so when we're communicating a project, when it comes to BI, analytics, all of it, there's a ton of work that needs to go in up front. It can be technical work, it can be culture work, it can be all of that work, but often that's missed or it's not understood. And so to get this beautiful dashboard, it's not just hire somebody that knows how to do Tableau development and they're off to the races. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be communicated to executives to let them know and make them understand what this process entails and why we need their commitment and executive sponsorship.
Exactly. So now we have our second check on our checklist for data governance, and perhaps the biggest hurdle for successful BI implementation, depending on the organization. But that leads us to our final topic area, and we're going to spend some time talking about that, those intuitive, user-friendly, and actionable tools. First, we'd like to do another poll. Hopefully the polls are up and running now. I'm not sure, but if not, just throw it in the chat again. But we were curious to see what kind of BI or data visualization tools you are currently using.
We are getting results. It's working.
Okay, great! Yay!
Give it just a few more seconds as people are entering their answers. Okay, it is slowed down. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So it looks like we are still Excel heavy, which is fine in a way. There's a lot of opportunity there, of course. I mean, I still use Excel on a day-to-day basis. But what that tells me is that we haven't moved into that full environment to where the process of creating visuals is completely automated.
So it is a crowded field out there for BI platforms. There are over 100 vendors with BI or data visualization, however you want to slice it, platforms. This is just a sampling of what's out there. So how do you choose which one is right for your organization? There is some research out there that can help us see at least where these vendors sit in the industry. We go to the next slide here. What this is a Gartner's Magic Quadrant. And if you're not familiar with what that is, every year they assess these analytics and business intelligence platforms on kind of like two basic criteria: their ability to execute and their completeness of vision. And so down at the bottom, it's that's where most of these vendors are kind of hanging out in this niche players and visionaries fields. And these tend to be the players that have a smaller market, or maybe they're just starting out, maybe they're still kind of doing beta testing, but for whatever reason, they've judged to not have quite as much ability to execute or as complete a vision. When we move up here, and what I want to focus on is that upper right-hand quadrant with the leaders in it. This is for 2018. And at that time, Microsoft, Tableau, and Qlik were kind of the three main leaders in the field. And Reed, if you want to just click through, we actually have about 5 years of this data. And if you want to keep an eye on that leaders field and just kind of see how things are changing over time in the next 5 years. So what I see as I click through these years is that not a lot is changing in that leaders field. We have still Microsoft, still Tableau, now owned by Salesforce, and Click. Those are the three main ones. I think ThoughtSpot kind of broke through a couple of years there, but for the most part, we're still looking at those top three as being judged, at least by a few measures, as being leaders in the industry. But does that mean that they are actually right for your organization? I'm going to kick it over to Reed, and he's going to talk about some of those factors to consider when choosing a vendor that's right for you.
Great. Yeah, and this question is probably the first question that whenever we embark on a BI project is, well, what software should we choose? And there's a lot of differentiating strengths and weaknesses of each of these products. However, I think the items that are most important to think about are not always thought about. So in my experience, the first thing you should consider is resourcing. Do you have staff that are experts in either of these or have experience in any of these? And if so, doing a cost benefit analysis on hiring new staff or training existing staff to do a new product might outweigh the actual cost of switching and doing licensing and such. And certainly if you're starting from scratch, if you have experienced Tableau developers on staff, maybe that should be your obvious go-to. Second is thinking about licensing, whether you have licensing existing. There's a lot of organizations that don't know that with Microsoft, the 365 licensing at a certain level, which is called the E5, it comes with the Power Platform, including Power BI. And that's Power BI Pro. So you just already have it. And so obviously, if you already have a tool, then you should use it if you're paying for it. The other thing that you should think about is what data are you connecting to and where does that live? So some organizations have sophisticated data warehouses and such, and that doesn't matter as much. But for smaller organizations or less resourced organizations, you really got to think about where that data is and can you connect to it natively with any of these tools. Microsoft Power BI and Tableau, of course, and Click have the ability to connect to a lot of different data sources. However, there are limitations. So I think about Razor's Edge users, NXT users. Microsoft Power BI has a free API native connector. So you can, today download Microsoft Power BI and connect up to your to the Sky API. Now that's beneficial and free, and so that might be a consideration. Tableau, on the other hand, doesn't have that native connector to the API. There are companies out there that will build that for you and charge you for it, but it's not free. So that's another really important consideration when choosing some of these tools. I think about Salesforce and CRM analytics that used to be, I think, Tableau Analytics, and it's gone through many iterations of the name. That tool within Salesforce is optimized for Salesforce data. It was not developed to be like a Tableau or a Microsoft Power BI in that it connects to a bunch of different data sources. It's really meant to just analyze within the Salesforce environment. So, aside from all those, so if you've gone through that and there's not a clear answer of which of these you should go for, then do a little bit of research and see what your preference is. I know for Excel users, Microsoft Power BI is easier to learn. The DAX language, which is the front-end visualization language to create calculations in Power BI, is very, very similar to Excel in creating calculations in Excel, where Tableau has a different coding language. So.
Okay, so we made it through our checklist. We talked about executive sponsorship. We talked about data governance. We talked about the right tools. But next, before we move on, I thought that it would be helpful to talk about my perspective as a person who went from a data analyst to really being a BI advocate. although that's not what I thought of myself at the time. And I really grew into it and only really realized in hindsight that was what I was trying to achieve. When I first started out I was just doing data visualization. I was learning Tableau. And oftentimes I kind of felt like, what's in this picture? I was a kid with a coloring book, making these, what I thought were cool visualizations. I wanted everyone to be as excited about them as I was. But as I mentioned in the beginning, when I first started developing dashboards, I ran into a lot of questions about the data, and I wasn't necessarily prepared for that, but I should have been. I just wanted folks to think my dashboards were really cool, really helpful, and I thought that that trust was implicit. In reality, it took time, and it should take some time, but hopefully with the checklist we've laid out, that will speed up that process. For me, for a while, it seemed like my dashboards were going into a black hole, never to be seen again. But my colleagues and I, and again, this is something we kind of learned over time, we became what I kind of think of as gently persistent. And we created opportunities for these dashboards to be highlighted, whether that was at team meetings, all staff meetings, or internal webinars. And we found enthusiastic advocates in our organization who were already on board and who could kind of open the door for us in different areas and help build momentum. We also worked closely with our IT team to ensure data quality and build trust. Eventually, we did get to a point. It took a couple of years, to be honest, but eventually we got to a point where dashboards were becoming an important piece in the decision-making process across the organization, to the point that they became an integrated part of strategy building. And I just say all this to be kind of a source of perspective and a source of encouragement, wherever you are in this BI journey. If you are kind of that consistent and persistent advocate, and take those proactive steps, eventually your work will start to become indispensable to your organization. So some final thoughts that I have, just to get into the right mindset as a BI advocate. I just wanted to share a few bullet points that I try to keep in mind myself. The first one, I always ask myself, is this actionable? When I'm actually developing a dashboard, I always ask myself this question. What we want to avoid is what we call vanity metrics. They're basically metrics that look cool or look good, but they're not actually telling us something that we can actually work with, that we can act on. We try to avoid that, keep everything from the place of actionable data. And that kind of goes into my second point. And this is a personal preference, and you can take it or leave it, but I prefer to think of myself as being data informed or data empowered and not data driven. I like to ask the question, is the data empowering you or your end users to act, to make decisions, to create strategy? When I think of data driven, I think of the data being in the driver's seat and we're just passengers along for the ride. But I prefer to think of us being in the driver's seat and we're using the data to navigate. Our navigation tool can offer us options, and ideally one day it can even predict the best course of action for us, but we're still driving. I understand that one day when we all have fully autonomous vehicles, this analogy is no longer going to function, but I don't think that's going to happen for a while. So for now, it still works. Third, what you get out is only as good as what you put in. It's that old adage, garbage in, garbage out. Make sure your data is strong and your dashboards will be strong too. And finally, as I mentioned before, change doesn't happen overnight. There will be an adjustment period. And based on your organization and how far along they kind of are on this journey, it might be longer than others. But be consistent and be persistent. Over time, people will see how transformative business intelligence can be for an organization. But there will be some obstacles in the way. Reed, do you have anything you'd like to share?
I think, especially on the third point, when we're talking about it's only as good as what you put in, it's not just data entry and data dictionaries and standardization. It's a culture. We have to rely on this and think about it in our organization as, you know, we shouldn't be making decisions without it, right? We have to be data informed, and thus our culture around data should be very, very important. So finally, shameless plug, how can BWF help? We do a lot of different services around business intelligence, obviously, but I just wanted to kind of highlight this. We build and deploy dashboard suites for folks, and this kind of falls in two different areas. One area being the organization does have staff, they have the expertise, but what they don't have, which none of us have, is time. Or the organizations that don't have the resources to go through these projects and build dashboards. So we can help there. We do a lot of training help. We provide training for those that are looking to sharpen their skill sets, be it Tableau or Power BI, but also for newbies that are just getting into it. And then with BWF, we don't stop at dashboards. Of course, we have a huge amount of expertise in our organization. And what's fun about the BI projects is we're talking about a lot of different strategies and such. And as we build these projects, we can leverage, you know, some of our experts in campaigns, our experts in feasibility, experts in annual giving, to help us build these dashboards, to help us share their perspective of what strategies to implement and how to use BI to implement those strategies. Aside from that, we'd like to set aside some time now to answer any questions they may have. We did have a couple come throughout that I'll try to answer. The first one, is there a tool for comparing the various tools that we had mentioned? There's a lot of information out there. The only bad part is it doesn't tell you what experience you have, obviously, at your organization, or what licensing you have, and those should be the main considerations. But aside from that, I think Gartner's Magic Quadrant is really resourceful. And then each of the vendors that are on each of the Magic Quadrants, they have their own press release when that comes out, and they talk a lot about the details and their competitive advantage versus the tools. I'll say that half of those vendors, you can create the same thing. You can do a lot of the same things. There's a lot of nitty gritty type issues that you can get into. You know, Tableau might be better at doing custom visuals, where Power BI might be better at doing data set cleanup and transformation on the front end. So there's a lot of nuance there. Awesome. We have another question from our perspective. What is the greatest hang up in getting these BI projects off? So the biggest barrier, I think it depends on the organization, but I would say executive sponsorship, to really get them to understand why it's important, is probably the number one thing. You know, they're happy to sign off on tools, but unless they adopt it and they're using it and really just implementing it into their strategy and their process and their meetings, they just go unused. And so you have all this time and resources spent on the data that we talked about, and then into the visualization, and then it's never used. That's a huge obstacle for having it be successful. And then second is data governance. Developing a data culture is hard, and I think it's really an important consideration, and we should be pouring resources into our data and data culture rather than trying to band-aid our data with tools and technology. Another question is, there's a difference in reporting data points like progress to goal versus the visualization of those data points. Can you talk about the skill set necessary to determine the best way to visualize data and to get the message across? Yeah, that's a really good question. So there are a lot of visualization techniques, going from, you know, tables of data to communicating what you are actually trying to communicate. And so when Kaitlin had mentioned earlier about making it actionable and asking that question, that's what you need to do with your dashboard is you say, as you're building the visual, what are you trying to communicate? And is that clear as day? I think about just like a car dashboard. We're using car analogies apparently all day. Your car dashboard, if an indicator light comes on, that's an actionable data point because we know that something is wrong. And if we don't have the expertise to go fix it, we'll take it to a dealership and then it's actionable. And so your dashboards and your metrics and such should have that kind of feeling, that context. So I think about, where are we in our campaign? Just as a high level observation, where are we and where are we, what is our progress to goal? Well, what are we doing with that information? Yes, we need to know that so we can tell board members where we are. But really we're looking for the variance. We're looking at, can we actually complete our goal? And so looking at the variances and then where we are today and how much time, and then can we actually project that goal out? And are we going to hit it? Because that's the question at the end of the road that we're going to have to answer. Can we meet our goal, right? I hope that was helpful. Kaitlin, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of good training out there to get your feet wet with any kind of visualization tool, especially with Tableau or Power BI. There are resources out there to kind of help you get there if you're first starting out. One of the great things about a tool like Tableau or Power BI is that you can really do a lot of trial and error at scale and really kind of be able to try a lot of things, see if they're working for you and working for your end users. And then, if they're not, it's really easy to just start over and create something again. Once you already have your data set ready and is working well, the actual visualization part can move very quickly. So if you're stuck on figuring out a way to visualize something well, it actually can be a really fast process to kind of just try something, try again until you and your end users find something that is really resonating with them. And I think it goes back to really having that trust relationship with your end users and really getting their perspective on things, making sure you're meeting their requirements and getting their feedback so that you can just keep making the dashboards better. You can think of them more as living documents than something that's set in stone. You can go back and make changes if something's not working with your audience.
So we had another question. When it comes to AI and ML, artificial intelligence and machine learning, between Power BI and Tableau, which one do you prefer the most? That's hard because it depends what we're talking about. So if we're talking about like prospect identification with using machine learning processes to do so, visualizing that result, either two can do that well. If we're talking about the features within each of those tools, they both have a little bit of what is technically AI, but it doesn't really feel like AI, like predicting data types and predicting relationships. And I know that Power BI has a regression model in it, and it has some sentiment analysis built into such. I think that if we're talking about those two processes, I think that Power BI is a little bit ahead. But I don't think either of them are doing it incredibly well at the moment. They're both trying to, and there was just a great article in New York Times yesterday that was talking about how fast AI is being adopted and accelerating in technology and such. And so I think within a couple of years, we're really going to see these BI tools take off when it comes to you actually implementing and using a ML machine learning models specifically, but also AI. All right. Any other questions for us? And again, please connect via LinkedIn or reach out via email. I'm happy to chat through anything. Talking Shop is definitely one of my favorites. So If there is nothing else, we will go ahead and give you back some time to your day. I hope this was helpful and I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to connecting with all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.